All right, looks like the participants number is kind of slowing down. So we'll go ahead and get started, but don't worry if a few people log in, we will be recording this and we can share it later if any of you have technical difficulties. But before we jump into the webinar, just one more reminder, if you want to communicate with me, ask a question along the way, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen usually. So you can open that up and type a question. Also, a colleague of mine is behind the scenes. So if there are questions about technology or anything like that, both between the two of us, we'll hopefully be able to help you. Sometimes it's hard to present and look at the questions. So if I don't get to it right away, I promise you I will get to as many questions as I can at the very end of this webinar. So that's kind of how it works. Use that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you want to ask any questions. All right, we'll get started. So my name is Melody Ferguson. I am the Associate Dean of Admission at Pacific Lutheran University. We're in Tacoma, Washington, for those of you that aren't local. And we do this Suit Up series. This is now our third time doing this series, really just to provide college search education. So I'm not here to talk about PLU. I'm just here to talk about things that might be questions you've had, or maybe just information you want to gather as you're starting or completing your college search. A little bit about me, a little background. I've been at PLU for 9 years, but working in higher education for 20. So I worked at 2 other universities, including 2 public colleges. So hopefully I'll have a lot of insight to share with you as we talk about the differences, similarities, or maybe the lack thereof throughout this session. Fun facts about me, I am a morning person. So usually around this time, I actually get a little bit tired. So I'm gonna need your energy through the screen. And then I'm currently on the quest for the best wood-fired pizza in Washington. So if any of you live in Washington and want to provide a suggestion, I would love that. I maybe ate a lot of it during COVID and just it's continuing. So yeah, or if you want a good suggestion, let me know. So those are a few fun facts about me. The other thing I like to share is that I was a first generation college student. So my family hadn't gone to college. I was going to be the first in my family to do so. And so one of the things I'm going to start with is some definitions, because people were using words that I just didn't understand when I was searching for colleges. And so part of this is just going to be breaking down what some of those words that maybe you've started to read or hear mean. So that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to start with definitions and examples of public colleges and universities and private colleges and universities, and talk about what that means, or maybe synonyms for those types of or those words. And then we're going to talk about how this actually applies to your college search, or kind of why does it matter to you? And then we will definitely have time for questions at the end. And like with any of these Suit Up series, we did one last week that was on how to start your college search. Maybe some of you came. If you didn't, you can find that on YouTube as well. This one, and then we have 2 more. If you just have questions about college in general, you can also feel free to ask those and we'll try to get to them. All right, let's jump right in. So what is a public university? It always seems like it's going to be more complicated than it really is, or there's going to be more things that you have to think about than you really do. But a public university, very simply, is just a university that's funded by that state. So sometimes they're called state universities as well. So they're funded by basically taxpayer money. You are supporting them by, if you live in Oregon, you're supporting the University of Oregon. University of Washington is a public university and is funded by the state of Washington. So those are just some examples as you think about what a public university is. Every state in the nation has a public university or college, but it does vary in terms of how many. So some of you may live in states that don't have as many options as maybe you do in places where there's 7 or 8 state colleges like Washington. So lots of choice out there. Public schools, it's really just about how they're funded. If they want to build a building or if they want to keep the lights on, the state is helping do those things. At the bottom are some examples of different public universities within, obviously, California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii. But wherever you're from, you would know maybe 1 or 2 of your state schools. A few more notes about that and what that means. So public schools or state colleges will have two tuition prices. And this is where sometimes it gets a little confusing. They're going to have an in-state price and an out-of-state price, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a resident and a non-resident price. And that's because there's two reasons. One, they want to encourage you to stay in the state that you're living. They want you to stay there and keep giving back to that community, that city, that environment. They also want to give you a benefit because you and your family have been basically helping support these colleges by living there and paying taxes. And so because of that, they're going to decrease that tuition cost because you've kind of helped fund that university. So that's why there's a difference in price, because if you want to go to an out-of-state public college, so say you live in Washington, but you want to go to University of Oregon, you haven't been supporting that university over your 17, 18 years of life. So that is why there's two tuition prices for those schools. In-state tuition, if you're looking at tuition prices, will usually look lower. It'll usually look at one of your maybe cheapest options because of these reasons. But they don't always give as many merit scholarships. And when we talk about merit scholarships, that's, scholarships based on primarily your GPA, maybe your leadership, maybe your talent. They might not have quite as much to give in that way because they are also having to support their state residents through more need-based scholarships. So if you're someone who the price of college is going to be unaffordable, they might give out a lot of need-based scholarships based on your family income. So those are just some things to consider when you look at a public university, whether you're looking at one in your state or one out of your state. Now, if you're someone who maybe lives down the street from me and you're like, oh, I just want to go to a state where it's sunny, a little more sunny, I'm going to go to Arizona. Well, you look and you see that the out-of-state or non-resident cost is expensive. And you're like, oh, I don't know if I can go there. There are programs across the nation. They exist in every region. I'm going to specifically use the one in our region, but there is a program called the Western Undergraduate Exchange, or super fun. It's WUI. It's really fun to say. And WUI is really awesome because it makes out-of-state tuition a little closer to in-state tuition at some schools in some states. So there's a lot of qualifications there. So I listed the states that the WUI works with, but they are kind of competitive, some of them. They might have limited numbers, they might require a specific GPA, and some are only available if you're intending to major in something very specific. So you'll have to kind of look school by school and state by state, and there is a Western Undergraduate Exchange website. But these also exist in the South, in the Northeast, in other places across the nation. So these are things you can start looking at if you're considering going out of state for college. So when we talk about public schools, it's kind of tricky because you have to think about the ones that are in your living environment, in your state, but you also have to think of the ones outside of your state if that's something you're interested in. And we'll talk through this. I'm going to show you specific examples here in a second. So if that all seems real confusing, just hold on tight and we will get to some more examples. I love examples because I'm a visual learner, so hopefully that'll help some of you as well. But before we get there, I want to talk about just what is a private university. So what's a private university? Some of you may currently go to a private high school. Some of you may have friends who go to a private high school. There's a similarity there, and that is that a private or independent, sometimes you'll hear them called, university doesn't receive funding to build a building or turn the lights on from the state that they're in. So all of their funding comes from tuition, from students, investments, private donors, those kind of things. So some examples are down at the bottom. So obviously Pacific Lutheran University, where I work, we're a private university. Stanford, Harvard, Seattle Pacific, Yale, USC, University of Portland, and so many more. Most states in the nation also have private universities, but again, varies by state. So what makes them a private university? Let's break that down a little bit more. They only have one tuition price. So they don't have in-state or out-of-state tuition. You don't have to ask about like resident tuition or how can I become a resident of that state. Just one tuition cost. Private school tuition can usually look more expensive when you're just kind of looking at them on paper. Looks more similar to what you would see for that out-of-state tuition at those public schools. So a lot of times students will say, oh, that's way too expensive. They'll get sticker shock and they don't even apply. But just like we talked about how the state colleges discount or make your tuition kind of a little less if you're a taxpayer of that state, private schools will make tuition a little bit less based on various factors that are going to vary by private school. But most students do not pay the price that you see kind of on paper because they're going to look at your GPA, they're going to look at your artistic talent or your athletic talent, or they're going to look at your coursework. Maybe you took some AP or IB or honors types of courses. And then they also offer those need-based scholarships. Private schools can receive federal and state funding for scholarships for students, though. So things like the Pell Grant or a state need grant within your state can apply also at a private school within that community. So those are not just reserved for public schools. Sometimes there's some confusion about that. So again, lots of information, maybe not quite clear yet. So let me kind of take that a little bit further. So the defining difference between a public and a private school is just how they're funded, and that ultimately affects their tuition costs. So it's actually pretty simple what the difference is. We could stop this presentation now, I'm done. No, just joking. We're gonna talk more about it, but that's the real difference. There are some things though to keep in mind. So here's the examples. This is for those of you that are like myself who are like, what does this mean on paper? So I picked 4 public schools. I tried to pick them in various states. I did pick 2 in Washington just because we're going to talk a little bit about how they truly are. That difference is just in that how they're funded. So these are 4 different schools in 4 different places. So Seattle, Olympia, Berkeley, Boulder. They're in different types of environments, urban, rural, suburban. And they have different acceptance rates. So acceptance rates means of the applicants they receive, how many do they accept? So here you're going to see that they accept, it's really varied, right? So some admit more than half of their applicants, some admit almost 100% of their applicants, 3/4, or even just 1/4. So that acceptance rate really varies across these 4 public schools. They're different sizes, although 3 are very similar. I should have picked one that was more in the like 17,000 range or something like that. But you'll see I picked a small one and some large ones. So they range in size and they also range in cost. So it's not like state schools across the nation all agreed on the same price for in-state tuition. It's going to vary by school. In our state, right, University of Washington and the Evergreen State College are both state colleges, but you'll see that their in-state tuition is different. So I put in-state tuition down at the bottom and out-of-state tuition, so that'd be resident and non-resident, so you could see the difference and that kind of discount that a state resident gets on tuition. And these do include room and board, just so you know. So these are all inclusive costs down at the bottom. So I just wanted to give you kind of a visual comparison across 4 schools. I got all of this information on bigfuture.com, which is a website that you can use to search for colleges. I'll give you some other resources at the end, but we like to give you some places you can go and do this yourself. So if you're looking at 4 completely different schools, you could compare them in this very similar way. So let's look at private schools just to see the difference. Here's PLU, USC, Harvard, and Willamette University. So again, different cities and states, different types of environments. I was laughing the other day when I was doing this that Willamette and my family, I live in Salem, is considered an urban university because it's kind of in downtown Salem, but urban in Salem versus urban in Los Angeles, kind of different. So, even the word urban doesn't mean the same thing when you're looking at these schools. The acceptance rates. So I showed you like really different acceptance rates across the board, different sizes. So here you really see some fluctuation in how large or small a school can get. And then down at the bottom, I did something different here. I put the cost, again, tuition, room, and board up at the top, and you'll see those vary. But then down below, I put the average cost, and you can see this on that website. And what that's doing is looking at the scholarships that students are receiving and taking those and applying them. So what you're going to see is, PLU's average cost is $25,362. Let's go back. University of Washington's average cost is $25,979. So private schools start to look a little bit more like that in-state price of a public school. So if you're looking at going out of state, it could be interesting to look at some private schools out of state, for example, because you might be able to bring that cost down for your family if that's a concern for you. But again, you can find all of this information on that website. So if you have kind of 4 dream colleges, you could also compare them this way. And just a reminder, if you have questions, you can throw them down in the Q&A below. All right, so what did you notice in looking at those? I didn't give you a ton of information, but what I hope you kind of realized and what I pointed out along the way is that it doesn't really matter if we put all 8 of those kind of together on one grid. There's not like 4 things that the public schools have more in common than the private schools have in common. So it isn't really about public or private. They're going to vary in size, location, setting, acceptance rate, athletic divisions, right? Some give out athletic scholarships, some don't. Academic offerings, so they're going to vary in what majors each of them have, and even in cost. So even though that's the defining characteristic or difference between the two, they're still going to vary in that way. So how can you apply this knowledge to your college search? When should it matter? Not often. So I know you came to this presentation, they told you not to worry about it. I think there's one big difference when I was looking around on websites. If you are someone that is seeking like a faith-based educational experience, you're only going to find that in a private college setting. Not at every private college. They're not defined by being a faith-affiliated or faith-based college. But at public schools, there is that separation of church and state, as we know, just like in your private or your public high schools. And so that would be something that if you want a faith-based educational experience, you would have to look at a private college. So as I looked around, that was really the only thing where like, this is the only, you have to go to this type of school for it to matter. Otherwise, this really isn't a huge part of your college search, but I think it's something you have to understand because especially with that tuition cost being slightly misleading at all college campuses, I wish it wasn't for you. I wish it was more transparent. You kind of have to put that aside and really try to think about what type of cost you would have on those college campuses. So what are some questions you can ask, especially if that sticker price kind of seems out of your budget? What can you ask to actually get to that answer to know what it's going to cost you to attend that university? Ultimately, you'll have to apply and you'll have to do your FAFSA or WASFA, and we're going to talk about those in the next 2 sessions, Suit Up for Senior Year sessions. But here's some questions you could ask. And I'm giving you terminology that we use in higher education. So what is your average net cost? Yeah, these are funny words, to a first-year student. So what does it actually cost an average first-year student? That's what you're asking. What's your average financial aid award? So kind of learning about what types of scholarships and amounts they're giving out. And are they considering loans a part of that? So that'd be money you have to pay back versus the free money, the money you don't have to pay back, which usually are called scholarships and grants. Does the school give out mostly need-based scholarships, or do they have options for things like musicians or artists or athletes or people with really great GPAs? And then you can also ask really specific questions like, what types of scholarships might I qualify for based on being blank? right? And you can fill that in based on whatever groups you belong to or have an affinity with or have a talent in. You could fill in the blank with that question. And I gave you some options down there. So these are questions that I would encourage you, if you really like a school, if it fits everything else that you want, especially reflecting back to some of the things that if you were joined Brandon last week, he talked about, then ask these questions before you cross it off your list just based on price alone. And these are some other things you can think of beyond public and private schools. A few of these things Brandon went over last week, but for those of you that weren't in that session, I wanted to bring them back in because if it's not about public or private, what is my college search about? And it's about all of these various things. You know, where is the place that you're going to be the most academically successful based on your learning style, your academic goals and aspirations? Where's a place that wants me, that I fit in or belong? And then thinking about size, shape, right? All of those fun things that we talked about are going to come over time. And as you start to be able to visit college campuses, you'll walk around and immediately know, you know, I don't really, this is too small for me, or this is too big for me, or this is, you know, I want to be in a less urban environment, or whatever the case may be. You'll kind of feel that as you walk around college campuses. But make this a choice that you're making, and you have all the power in this decision of ultimately where you apply. One of the things I always like to say is that right now you're only deciding where you're going to apply. You're not deciding where you're going to go. And I think maybe that puts a little less pressure on the choices you're making right now. But these are some questions you can kind of ask yourself that I think will matter more than whether the school is a public or a private college. These are some places in which you can do your research. And again, just wanted to make sure you had some of these like websites like bigfuture.com, niche.com, capex.com. If you're like, how did she know what the average net cost is that someone pays? How can I find that out? These websites all have it. We have to report that information. And so they're able to compile it for you. So you can definitely do that. And these are some places or people that might help you navigate this experience, or help you understand better what it is that might matter to you if you're having a hard time figuring that out. So use these people. There is an admission counselor at every university who is assigned to your high school, your state, or maybe your community, and they are excited to talk to you. There's someone like myself who, you know, this is why they do what they do. So lots of ways for you to find out. I also want you to know that you can get in. I know I showed some schools that have really low acceptance rates. And so I wanted to definitely put this in here, that fewer than 100 colleges in the US are highly selective, meaning they accept less than 25% of their applicants. So you have lots of universities, so many, that can fit any student. So know that there is a place for you, for everyone, and you'll be able to help find that, especially if you do your research like we talked about on the previous page. So you would just Google Pacific Lutheran University acceptance rate, and it pops up. So you don't even have to click on a link or go to a website. You can just like Google it, and there it is. So don't feel like you have to even know how to navigate this college search. That's something you can look at if you're curious about a specific school that you want to go to. All right, so we blasted through that in about 25 minutes, which is great. I was aiming for this being a 30-minute session for you. I know you're all busy wrapping up your senior year, or for some of you, you're done with your senior year. Happy summer. So I'm curious if anyone has questions about college in general or about some of the things I talked about. And yes, for those of you that are here, I just stole Brandon's slide because I thought it was fun. So any questions that have come up? I see a hello, which is great. All right. I'm looking. Sorry, it always takes me a second to find everything. Okay, well, I think we have, looks like maybe one question. PLU is a private school, so that's great. I said wrapping up my senior year. Yes, sorry everyone, you are sophomores or juniors. You are not wrapping up your senior year. told you I thought it was Friday today. So clearly I don't know what day it is, but I promise you most of what I said was accurate. All right, one question. All right. This is a great question. When can we start our application? And this actually brings me, I'm going to go to this page because it's a lot of looking at this. When can you start your application? So most college applications open the August of your senior year. So for some of you, if you start school in September, it starts before you even start school. For those of you that start school in August, it's kind of right around the time you'd be starting school. So the college applications open usually around that time. And then you would fill them out, obviously, as you go. And what's really nice is next week, there's a college applications kind of tips and tricks session. So it'll go kind of broadly over college applications. And we will be talking about dates and deadlines and all of those kind of things. So definitely join us next week if you can. If you can't, we'll definitely get that on the PLU Admission YouTube channel as soon as possible. Great question. Yeah, what is a good site to sign up for scholarships? So actually what's interesting, we were just talking about this today in the office because we were preparing an email to go out to sophomores and juniors, which a lot of you are, and it was about starting your scholarship search. And these three websites, although I talked about them, as college search websites, actually have college scholarship search engines as well. So you could use those three. There's a ton out there. Sometimes there's ones that are specific to your state. Those are interesting because the competition is a little bit less, right? They're not national. I would encourage you to do that. A lot of times, like if you have a career center or a counseling center at your high school, they'll have links to some local scholarships. So I would definitely look at those too. But these three websites are a great place to start. Just click on the scholarship section of the website versus the college search section of the website. Great question. What scholarships at PLU have deadlines that we should know? So we will do a financial aid and scholarships suit up, where we'll also dive a little bit deeper into this. But yes, I think it's a great question. Most universities do have specific scholarships for their university, and they will have dates and deadlines and all of that stuff that you have to pay attention to. For us, if you apply to PLU in kind of October, November of your senior year, we're going to make sure that we let you know about any scholarship opportunities that are available to you. And most other colleges are going to do that as well. So the earlier you apply, the easier it is to not miss out on any deadlines. But some of our scholarship deadlines happen in December of your senior year. Yeah, great question. Lots of scholarship and financial aid questions, probably because we talked about tuition a lot in here, which makes total sense. And I love that you're already like early thinking about those things, because there are scholarships that you can start looking for as early as your sophomore year of high school. So it's never too early to start kind of cultivating that list of scholarships or applying to scholarships. And if you wait till your senior year, it can get really busy, right? Because you have so much going on, plus you're applying to college. So the earlier you start, or even if you dedicate just a little bit of your summer to that, that should be great. Okay, I think we've gotten through all the questions, which is great. Hoping that everyone is just leaving being like, oh, good. It's okay that I don't totally know what all these terms mean. I really want to find the right school for me. So my last tip for you is just to take ownership of this process, but to also have a little bit of fun with it. So if you want to meet your admission counselor at PLU, there's a link below. You can also easily find it off of our website. And then hopefully we'll see some of you back for next week when we'll talk about the essay and the application and test scores and transcripts and GPAs, all sorts of things within that college application tips and tricks session. So we'll hope to see you back next week. Thanks for joining me. There's a couple questions. Hold on. Someone said thank you. You're welcome. Okay, we'll end on this note. Do you suggest taking the ACT or SAT this year? The majority of schools have gone test optional even into next year. So fairtest.org is a great site to look at. But there's so many schools that are test optional that I would say don't take it if you don't want to. If it's causing you undue anxiety and stress, it's probably not worth it. But if you want to take it, you can, right? If you have that opportunity within your state and you feel safe and healthy to do so. But it seems rather unnecessary going into the future. And that's my personal opinion. So thank you for that. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you, and we will see you next week.